All right, Donald Kendall here with another Stopping Socialism video, joined by, as always, by Justin Haskins. So, continuing on our little series that we've been doing, if you've been following our videos, we're doing a little series where we're breaking down some of the more popular memes, pro-socialism memes that have been shared on the posts of our Facebook page. So yeah, that's kind of the gimmick here. So let's pull up the next meme here.
All right, here comes.
All right, so it reads, I guess those that hate socialism must always hate police, firefighters, public K through 12 schooling, public transportation, libraries, parks, highways and bridges, and Social Security. Oh, and the military. Oh man, they got us, Justin. I think this is a mortal wound. I don't know how we're going to be getting over this one. We might just have to shut the page down.
First of all, let me begin by saying I hate libraries. That is 100% true. Libraries are horrible. I say get rid of all the libraries, so we could start there.
Yeah, you know, like this is an interesting one because we almost have to go through these like piece by piece, right? So
yeah.
So I think the idea here, and I'll throw it to you, get your thoughts on it. But the idea here is that anything that's related to the government must be socialism, and we must hate them if we don't like socialism. So these are the list of just kind of what I assume this person that made this meme thinks is just like the most core functions of the government itself. So, Justin, I mean, do you hate all of these things?
No, I don't hate all of these things, but I think it's interesting that socialists point to this argument because if this is true, let's just assume that it's true, that police, firefighters, K through 12 schools, transportation, libraries, it's all socialism. These are all this means socialism. Libraries equals socialism. If that's true, then what is liberalism? What is progressivism? What is conservatism in most places that have public? I mean, everywhere has public roads. Every society in Western civilization has public roads. Are they all socialists? So right off the bat, you know there's something wrong here when you've got them defining socialism in such a way that everybody becomes a socialist who's ever lived in the United States of America, essentially, except for a handful of anarcho-capitalists and people like that. They're the only ones who are not socialists, I guess.
Say. Yeah, and their little spectrum here, you've got the anarcho-capitalists that want none of these things, and then everyone else should be in favor of socialism. Right?
Exactly. So that right off the bat, that just shows you that there's something very, very wrong here.
So this goes back to like a point that we always try to get across, which is like kind of what do we mean by socialism, right? Because there's a couple of different ways that you can kind of use that term. One of which is socializing a specific industry. So we'll talk about that when we always talk about healthcare and, Medicare for all, universal healthcare, something like that, right? So that's not necessarily, like the Scandinavian countries that we talk about. They have programs like that. That doesn't mean that they're a socialist country. That industry is socialized. Socialism, when we're talking about it, generally speaking, is the socialization of the entire economy. The government totally controlling everything in the society, the economy in general.
Or most of it.
Yeah, and right. So, but then, while we'll talk about that for the most part, we also talk about just the socializing of certain industries and why that is bad as well. So again, this is trying to really take that term and generalize it over anything that could be remotely considered socialized.
Yes, and the other thing too that I think is really interesting about this is that if we were to go through these things line by line, I mean, sure, some of these, like let's say firefighters, and there's a couple things in here, parks, where people don't necessarily think of those things and then think of, corruption and problems and whatever. But a lot of these things you do. I mean, the left is the one saying police are a bunch of horrible racists who we shouldn't trust and who are terrible people. Okay, so we could cross them off. That's not a good example. Public K through 12 schooling is a disaster by any standard. America's K through 12 schooling is a total joke. It ranks like in the 30s in the world, even though we spend basically as much. I think we're either number 1 or number 2 per pupil in public funding for education in the entire world. And yet we have like the 30-something ranked public education system. So you can cross that off. That's obviously not a very good system. Public transportation? Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? I mean, my God, there is nothing worse other than maybe going to the post office. There is nothing worse than trying to have a rational conversation with someone who runs public transportation in Chicago. Like, there's just nothing worse. Okay. You want to throw yourself off of a bridge after having a 5-minute phone conversation or a 5-minute conversation in person with a CTA worker. It's awful. And again, libraries are not necessarily bad places or anything like that. They're not necessarily the biggest cost waster or anything. But I mean, in reality, they're kind of pointless in much of America. And yet we have this gigantic system of libraries. It's a relic from, 50, 60 years ago or something, or maybe 30 years ago. Today, you can get any book you want for almost nothing on the internet now anyway. And so are libraries really the thing you want to point to and say, well, look at how wonderful they are? Highways and bridges, it's the same thing. Have you ever heard of the Big Dig? Have you ever heard of big transportation problems that exist? Our crumbling infrastructure that the government's been in charge of? I mean, we can go on and on and on. The point is, I don't think government programs.
Wait, keep going. Social Security. How is that functioning? Is that doing well?
You're right. Social Security is, look, I don't even think about Social Security anymore because as far as my world is concerned, I'm never going to get it. It's not going to exist. It'll exist if I survive to 95 years old. Maybe I'll get a fraction of what they get today when I'm 95. I mean, Social Security is going bankrupt. The military, again, the left hates the military. It's just so ironic that these are the things that they point to when I can look at these things. There's at least 2 things on here right off the bat that they think are horrible and racist and violent in their own list.
Well, let me take a couple of swings at this too, because I think that there's a couple of things that you have to take into account. One is kind of what we were talking about. Like, honestly, is your spectrum like the anarcho-capitalists that want no government period and everybody else? Because I think that there is plenty of people that are fiscal conservatives, even straight up libertarians, that know that there are core functions that the government is there to serve, right? That is like, protection of rights and, national defense. So it's like military and police right up there. Even firefighters, the public schooling, the system as you described is horrible, and we should overhaul that. But I think that your average conservative even would think that funding education from a government level is probably a good thing. It's just how we go about doing that. And then, just the broken systems that we're talking about here. The other way I want to look at it too is just kind of like the localization of that control, right? Like, I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but there's not a federal bureau of firefighters that are controlling and operating fire departments in everyone's local community. Like, I've said it before, like, socialism works the smaller you can get it. Okay. So like, socialism works in a family unit. 1 or 2 people bring home the money, and then the family operates everything that needs to be done inside that home. Once you start scaling it up, it gets worse and worse and worse. Right. So if we had the federal government maintaining the libraries or something, it would be even worse than how they're controlled right now. So that's another thing to kind of take into account. And my favorite kind of thought experiment with that idea is like, let's say Justin and I wanted to go to lunch or something today. I think we could probably figure out where to go within a few minutes, right? Just the 2 of us trying to figure out what do we like? What did you have yesterday? What do you have a taste for today? If you're trying to do that with 6 million people to figure out where to go to lunch, taking into everybody's dietary restrictions and just everything that has to do with that, we would never go to lunch.
Well, that's a great point. And the other thing too is, and this is actually a really important point. If you don't like it, when you're thinking about where you want to live, right? People talk all the time about how good are the schools, how safe are the communities, what are the, parks like nearby? Like, that's a common thing that you think about when you're moving, right? Because you want to pick a location that's a good place to live, and you base it in part on these and other factors. what's really interesting about this is if you have a national system, there are no choices. It's just whatever the national system spits out. So the whole idea that you can have a nationalized whatever it is, like let's say healthcare system, if that system's broken, that's it. It's broken. There's no place for you to go. You're screwed. But if the local police aren't doing a good job protecting a community, you can move to a different community. If you really care about libraries and the library sucks down the street, go to a town with a better library, or go to better where there's more parks or better schools or whatever. So even if you believe in this form of well, I want to have some socialized facilities and some socialized services and everything, and most conservatives believe in that, what really separates a conservative from a liberal, let's say, not a socialist, but a liberal, is that they might be okay with some of these services, but they want them to be as local as possible, and they want the power that these things have to be as limited as possible.
Exactly.
That's the difference here. So I hear this all the time, and it's really infuriating because it's just so stupid. And yet I just don't think a lot of people really think it through.
Yeah, it's so stupid. And again, I'll give my graphic design perspective on here before we end this one. This one's not bad. I would definitely make the top portion, I guess that means it's, whatever, that part, I would bold that a little bit, and maybe justify everything else like left. I think centering everything doesn't do it justice, but I do like the big impact one on the bottom. So I'm going to give this meme from just like a graphic standpoint, like an 8. But, all right, Justin, anything you want to talk about before we sign off for this little mini episode?
Nothing from me.
All right, everyone, if you like videos like this, come to our Facebook page, share these videos. That's the most important thing about this. We got to get this in front of as many people as possible. We're going to do more videos like this. Facebook, Stopping Socialism. Come follow us on YouTube. You can find us Stopping Socialism. Subscribe there. We also have an Instagram page if that's where you want to get your stuff. But yeah, join us. Go to stoppingsocialism.com and find more videos like this.